I never used to think twice about the circus posters that appeared around town. They'd show up overnight, plastered on telephone poles and abandoned storefronts, their colors somehow too vibrant against the gray urban backdrop. But now, every splash of red, every painted smile makes my hands tremble. It started 3 weeks ago, when Marcus disappeared. We'd been having drinks at O'Malley's, our usual Thursday ritual since college. He'd been distracted that night, kept glancing over his shoulder at the window behind our booth. I thought he was watching for his girlfriend, they'd been fighting again, but when I turned to look, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. A face, pale as moonlight, pressed against the glass. Not just any face, a clown's face, with features painted in stark angles that seemed wrong somehow, like a child's drawing brought to horrible life. The red smile stretched too wide, curling up at the edges in a way that defied anatomy. But it was the eyes that haunted me, dark, intelligent, and utterly human behind the grease paint. When I turned back to Marcus, his seat was empty. His half-finished beer sat untouched, condensation beating on the glass. I thought he'd gone to the bathroom, but his coat still hung on the hook beside our booth. His phone lay face down on the table, screen dark. The bartender said he hadn't seen Marcus leave. The security cameras showed nothing, just static during the precise minutes when he vanished. The police filed a report, but they didn't take it seriously. Just another adult who chose to walk away from his life, they said. But I knew better. I'd seen that face in the window, and in the weeks that followed, I started noticing things. The posters appeared closer to my apartment. The same twisted smile showed up in my peripheral vision, always vanishing when I turned to look. And at night, I sometimes hear calliope music drifting through my walls, though there hasn't been a circus in town for years. Yesterday, I found a red nose, the kind clowns wear, sitting on my welcome mat. When I picked it up, it was still warm, as if someone had just been wearing it. I haven't slept since then. Because every time I close my eyes, I see that face in the window, and I know, with terrifying certainty, that Marcus was just the beginning. The dream started 3 nights ago. Always the same, I'm walking through a carnival after hours, the rides creaking in a wind I can't feel. The air smells of stale cotton candy and wet earth, and somewhere in the distance, a calliope plays a tune that seems to follow me, always just out of sync with my footsteps. In the dream, I'm looking for Marcus. I can hear him laughing, but it's wrong somehow, hollow, like it's coming from inside an empty oil drum. I follow the sound past shuttered game booths with their prizes hanging limp and colorless in the dark. Past a carousel where the horses seem to turn their heads to watch me pass, their painted eyes reflecting light that isn't there. The laughter leads me to a striped tent, its colors bleached by moonlight. The entrance flap moves in that windless air, beckoning. Inside, rows of empty folding chairs face a spotlight circle on bare dirt. And in that circle, there's a single red balloon. I always wake up just as I reach for it, my sheets soaked with sweat, the taste of circus peanuts bitter on my tongue though I haven't eaten them since I was a child. This morning was different. I woke to find an envelope pushed under my door. No postmark, no return address. Just my name written in elaborate cursive, the letters formed from tiny dots like an old circus billboard. Inside was a ticket, heavy cardstock that felt oily against my fingers. Admit 1, it read in faded red letters, and below that, special midnight performance, for your eyes only. The ticket is sitting on my desk as I write this, and I swear the ink is changing color, shifting from red to deep purple and back again when I'm not looking directly at it. An hour ago, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus's number, the first activity on his account since he vanished. When I opened it, there was only a single emoji: a circus tent. I know I shouldn't go. Everything rational in me screams that this is wrong, that I should take the ticket to the police, that I should leave town, change my name, forget I ever saw that face in the window at O'Malley's. But I keep thinking about Marcus. About the look in his eyes just before he disappeared, like he was seeing something that both terrified and transfixed him. About the way his laughter sounds in my dreams, wrong but somehow familiar. And I keep thinking about that clown's face, those two human eyes behind the makeup, watching, waiting, knowing I'd find my way to this moment. The ticket says midnight. It's 11:27 p.m. now. The old fairgrounds are only a 15-minute drive from my apartment. I have to know. The abandoned fairgrounds breathed in the midnight air, exhaling decay and memories of long-dead summers. My headlights caught the entrance arch, its paint peeling like dead skin, revealing rust-eaten metal beneath. The letter F in Fairgrounds hung upside down, transforming the word into something that felt like a warning. I killed the engine but left the keys in the ignition. The silence pressed against my eardrums like cotton wool, broken only by the soft tick of my cooling engine and something else, a wet, sliding sound from somewhere in the darkness, like rubber soles on damp concrete. The ticket burned in my pocket, its edges somehow warm despite the October chill. As I stepped out of the car, my shoes crunched on something that wasn't gravel. Looking down, my phone's flashlight revealed countless tiny shards of mirror, each reflecting a different fragment of the sky. In one piece, I caught a glimpse of movement, a flash of white face paint, there and gone before I could be sure. The main pathway stretched before me, lined with dead carnival games. Their awnings hung in tatters, fluttering without wind. Stuffed animals, bleached by sun and rain, stared with black button eyes that seemed to follow my movement. One, a moth-eaten giraffe, had fresh red lipstick smeared across its muzzle. I found myself counting my steps, the way you do when you're trying to convince yourself you're still in control. 27 steps past the ring toss booth, where every ring was perfectly aligned on its peg. 43 steps past the duck chute, where each metal target had been repainted with a familiar face, Marcus's face, repeated dozens of times in garish carnival colors. The Ferris wheel loomed ahead, a skeleton against the starless sky. As I watched, one car swayed gently, though there wasn't a breath of wind. Something dark dripped from its base, forming a pool that reflected nothing. That's when I heard it, the calliope music from my dreams, but distorted, playing at quarter speed. The melody was recognizable now, entry of the gladiators, the traditional circus march. But something was wrong with the key, the notes bending in ways that made my teeth ache. A shadow detached itself from behind the ticket booth ahead. In the dim light, I could make out the silhouette of an impossibly tall figure, its proportions just wrong enough to send ice down my spine. It moved with a liquid grace that denied physics, each step covering more distance than it should. "Welcome to the show," it said in a voice like balloons rubbing together. "We've been waiting for you. Marcus said you'd come." The figure stepped into a shaft of moonlight, and I saw that its face wasn't painted at all. The white was its skin, the red its flesh, and its smile contained far too many teeth, each one filed to a perfect point. "Your seat," it gestured with a gloved hand that bent at too many joints, "is in the front row." The tent loomed before me, its striped fabric undulating like the surface of a disturbed pond. My footsteps left no prints in the sawdust as I followed the clown through the entrance, though its feet sank deep with each step, leaving holes that slowly filled themselves in behind us. Inside, the air felt wrong, too thick, too warm, carrying the coppery scent of old radiators and something sweeter that reminded me of decay. Rows of empty seats stretched up into darkness, their red velvet catching what little light filtered through the canvas above. But something was off about their arrangement. They seemed to curve in impossible ways, as if they were following the geometry of a space that wasn't quite our own. The spotlight hit me like a physical force, its beam somehow cold against my skin. The circle of light it created on the ground wasn't quite round, its edges wavering like a mirage. "Please," the clown gestured to a single chair positioned dead center in the front row. "Your friend is so eager to perform for you." The chair looked ordinary enough, fold-out metal, probably salvaged from some school auditorium. But as I drew closer, I noticed that its shadows fell in the wrong direction, stretching toward the light instead of away from it. I sat. The metal was warm, almost feverish against my back. "Ladies and gentlemen," the clown's voice echoed, though there was no one else to hear it. "Tonight's performance is a very special reunion." Its smile stretched wider with each word, until its face seemed to be mostly teeth. "You see, Marcus has learned so many new tricks." The spotlight swung upward, illuminating the trapeze platform high above. A figure stood there, dressed in a costume that sparkled wetly in the light. It took me a moment to recognize Marcus. His face was painted now, white with delicate blue teardrops running down his cheeks. But his eyes were what stopped my breath. They were empty, like windows into a dark room. "Marcus," my voice sounded thin, distant. "What did they do to you?" He smiled, and his teeth were all wrong, not filed like the clown's, but reorganized somehow, as if someone had taken them all out and put them back in a different order. "They showed me how to fly," he said, but his lips didn't move with the words. "They showed me how to laugh. Won't you laugh with me?" The calliope music swelled, its rhythm matching my heartbeat exactly. Marcus stepped forward, his movements jerky like a puppet with tangled strings. Below him, there was no safety net, only a darkness that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "The first act," the clown whispered, suddenly beside me though I hadn't seen it move, "is always someone's last." Marcus spread his arms, and I realized with growing horror that his costume wasn't sparkling, it was weeping, dark drops falling upward into the spotlight's beam. And as he leaned forward into empty air, his laughter began to sound exactly like mine. That I tried to stand, but my body wouldn't respond. The chair had become part of me, or perhaps I had become part of it. Each breath drew in air that tasted of grease paint and copper, and somewhere beneath the calliope's dying notes, I could hear the soft sound of canvas walls breathing. Marcus hung suspended in the spotlight's beam, but he wasn't falling. Instead, he began to dance in the air, his limbs moving with a grace that belonged to something that had never been human. Dark drops continued to fall upward from his costume, forming constellations in the beam of light above him. As I watched, the drops began to spell out words: "Join us. Join us. Join us." "Beautiful, isn't he?" The clown's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "We've been perfecting this act for generations. Some performers take to it naturally, they understand that laughter and screams are just different notes in the same song." The spotlight began to strobe, each flash revealing Marcus in a different position, each one more impossible than the last. In one, his spine bent backward until his head touched his heels. In another, his fingers had elongated into writhing tendrils that wove patterns in the air. And in each flash, his face grew more like the clown's, that terrible smile spreading wider, wider, until it seemed to split his head in two. "Do you feel it yet?" the clown whispered, its breath hot against my ear though I could see it standing in the center ring, 20 feet away. The moment when your mind starts to unknot itself, when all those tight little rules about what's possible begin to unravel. I did feel it. Reality was becoming soft around the edges, like a watercolor left in the rain. The seats around me had begun to pulse with a subtle rhythm, and I realized with growing horror that they looked less like chairs now and more like rows of teeth in a massive, circular mouth. Marcus fought it at first, too, the clown continued, now speaking with Marcus's voice. He clung to all those precious memories, college days, Thursday drinks, the life he thought was real. But we showed him the truth. Its face split open like a ripe fruit, revealing another face beneath, then another, and another, each one a person I had known who had vanished over the years. The air grew thicker, syrupy with the weight of accumulated nightmares. My reflection in Marcus's mirrored costume fragments showed my face beginning to change, white patches blooming across my skin like frost on a window. My smile felt too wide, too full of something that might have been either laughter or screams. And still, Marcus danced above, each movement writing new laws of physics in the space between heartbeats. The calliope music had transformed into something that sounded almost like words: your turn, your turn, your turn. I realized, with a clarity that felt like falling, that I was no longer afraid. After all, every circus needs new performers. And I was beginning to understand why Marcus was smiling. The first changes were subtle. I watched my fingers elongate in the strobing light, each joint developing new angles of movement that shouldn't have been possible. My skin had begun to shed its humanity like old wallpaper, revealing something pearl-white and luminous beneath. Each breath drew in more of that thick, sweet air, and with every exhale, I felt memories floating away like confetti in a winter wind. The chair had melted into me completely now, its metal becoming my bones, its rust my blood. Above, Marcus's dance had become a blur of motion that left trails in the air like shooting stars, each arc telling the story of his own transformation. I understood now why he hadn't screamed when they took him. Some changes are too profound for sound. Yes, the clown purred, its voice resonating in frequencies that made my new bones sing. You're beginning to see with better eyes. It reached toward my face with those impossible fingers, and I felt something crack behind my eyes, not painfully, but like the breaking of a seal, letting in colors I'd never known existed. The big top around us had become transparent, revealing the true circus beyond, a vast, writhing architecture of light and shadow that folded through dimensions I suddenly had names for, though I'd never learned them. The audience seats were full now, but not with people. The shapes that sat there, watching with avid attention, were the faces of everyone I'd ever known, all of them laughing in perfect, terrible harmony. My tongue found new shapes in my mouth, tasting the vibrant flavors of fear and wonder that floated in the air like cosmic dust. The calliope music had become visible, threading through the space in ribbons of sound that wrapped around my transforming limbs like loving serpents. The final act approaches, the clown announced, but its mouth didn't move. Instead, the words appeared as scratches in the fabric of reality itself. Are you ready to take your place in our eternal performance? I tried to answer, but what came out was pure sound, the kind of laughter that exists in the space between stars. My bones had become rainbow mercury, flowing and reshaping themselves into something glorious and terrible. The spotlight above fragmented into 1,000 points of light, each one containing a different version of the truth. Marcus descended like a falling star, his costume now a living thing that rippled with colors that hurt to perceive. He reached for me with hands that had become works of abstract art, and I understood that this wasn't an ending, it was an overture. The last piece of my old face cracked and fell away like a porcelain mask, revealing the masterpiece beneath. And as the clown's laughter merged with mine, I realized that every disappearance, every missing person poster, every forgotten name had been leading to this moment. We were becoming the story that shadow writers tell their children to keep them awake at night. We were becoming the color that fear would be, if fear had a spectrum visible to human eyes. We were becoming forever. Time had become a circle in the big top, each moment bleeding into the next like watercolors in rain. I watched my transformation reflect infinitely in the mirror-shard costume Marcus wore, each reflection showing a different stage of what I was becoming. In some, I was still mostly human, my skin just beginning to take on that luminous quality. In others, I was something that geometry hadn't yet found words to describe. The clown, though that word no longer felt adequate, moved through space like liquid light, its presence rippling through dimensions that my new senses were only beginning to comprehend. Each movement left echoes in reality, little tears through which I caught glimpses of other performances, other transformations, other circuses that existed in the spaces between moments. Your old life, it spoke in frequencies that made my transformed bones resonate, was just a chrysalis. A temporary shape to house you until you were ready to emerge. Its smile had become a fractal thing, each tooth containing infinite smaller smiles, each one promising secrets that would have broken my former mind. The tense canvas walls had dissolved entirely now, revealing the true nature of our venue, a vast amphitheater constructed from crystallized time and solidified dreams. The audience I'd seen earlier was still there, but I understood now that they weren't wearing the faces of people I'd known, they were wearing the concepts of faces, the platonic ideal of watching and waiting and hungering. Marcus danced through the kaleidoscope of spotlights above, each movement creating new forms of mathematics. His laughter traced equations in the air that solved for variables that existed only in the spaces between thoughts. Remember when we thought reality was solid? His voice chimed like breaking glass. Remember when we believed in things like up and down? I did remember, but those memories were becoming abstract, like trying to recall the plot of a book you'd read in childhood. My new body moved with liquid grace, each gesture leaving trails of possibility in the air. The chair that had been my anchor was now part of the performance, transforming into a series of shapes that explored the boundaries between furniture and philosophy. The calliope music had evolved into something that existed simultaneously as sound, light, and pure conceptual thought. It wrote stories in the air around us, tales of every person who had ever vanished into the embrace of this eternal circus. I saw their transformations mapped out in musical notes that tasted like stardust and smelled like the color of dreams. Deep in what had once been my chest, my heart wasn't beating so much as it was conducting an orchestra of impossible frequencies. Each pulse sent waves of change through my form, reshaping flesh and bone into materials that existed only in the moments between seconds. My blood had become a liquid prism, refracting light into colors that human eyes were never meant to perceive. The final curtain approaches, the clown announced, its voice a symphony of breaking reality. But in our circus, the show never truly ends. It merely transforms, like you are transforming now. The spotlight above fragmented into a constellation of impossible geometries, each beam containing the complete history of light itself. In their glow, I watched my hands become works of art that Escher would have wept to witness. My fingers traced patterns in the air that solved mysteries mathematicians hadn't yet discovered. Marcus descended once more, but this time I saw him clearly, saw the beautiful horror of what he had become, what I was becoming. His form was a living contradiction, a walking theorem that proved reality was more flexible than humanity had ever suspected. "Welcome," he said, his voice harmonizing with frequencies that existed only in theoretical physics, to the only truth that matters. The clown's laughter echoed through dimensions, each note a key unlocking new levels of understanding in my transforming consciousness. I realized that every disappearance throughout history, every missing person, every unexplained absence, had been an audition. We were becoming part of something eternal, something that had existed in the shadows of human perception since the first caveman painted a smile on a wall and felt a shiver of something greater. The big top had become a mouth, swallowing reality itself, and we were its teeth, its tongue, its endless song. Every circle was becoming complete, every performance leading to this moment of perfect, terrible understanding. And as the last pieces of my humanity dissolved into the cosmic laughter that filled every atom of space around us, I understood the final, beautiful truth: we weren't just becoming the circus. We were becoming the thing that circus had always been trying to imitate. I remember my last moment of humanity with the same distant fondness one might recall a childhood dream. It slipped away like smoke through fingers, leaving behind something far more magnificent and terrible. The transformation had reached its finale, and I had become a living paradox, both observer and observed, performer and performance, the laugh and the thing that causes laughter. The big top had evolved beyond physical space, its boundaries now defined by the limits of sanity itself. Above me, what had once been canvas was now a living membrane that pulsed with constellations of eyes, not human eyes, but geometric patterns that somehow served the same function. They watched us with a hunger that transcended physical desire, feeding on the moment of transformation like gourmands at an infinite feast. Marcus moved through the space beside me, his form now a collection of beautiful impossibilities. Each gesture left traces in reality like claw marks in fresh snow, but instead of filling in, these wounds in the world's fabric leaked moments from other times, other places. Through one tear, I caught a glimpse of a Victorian-era carnival where the same transformation was taking place, the victims' terrified expression melting into rapturous understanding as their humanity fell away like autumn leaves. Time to meet the rest of the troupe. The clown's voice resonated through my new anatomy, each word triggering cascades of synesthetic responses, tastes of colors that existed only in madmen's dreams, sounds that painted fractals across my consciousness. It gestured with a hand that had become a living kaleidoscope, and reality parted like a curtain. Behind that veil, I saw them all, every missing person who had ever vanished into the embrace of our eternal circus. They moved in perfect, horrible harmony, each one a unique interpretation of the transformation we had undergone. Some had become living sculptures of light and shadow, their forms suggesting shapes that Euclidean geometry had never dreamed possible. Others were more subtle horrors, things that looked almost human until you noticed the way space bent around them, or how their movements left echoes in time itself. The calliope music had evolved into something that existed simultaneously as sound, light, and pure mathematical theory. Each note rewrote the laws of physics in small but significant ways, creating pockets of space where gravity flowed sideways and time moved in spirals rather than lines. I understood now that this music was the true language of our kind, a means of communication that transcended the crude limitations of human speech. "Watch closely," the clown whispered, its voice now a choir of impossible harmonies. "This is the moment when eternity notices itself." The spotlight above, which had been our last anchor to conventional reality, shattered into a million points of light. Each fragment contained a different version of the truth, scenes from every performance that had ever been or would be. I saw myself reflected infinitely, each reflection showing a different stage of what I had become, what I was becoming, what I would always be becoming. The audience, those watchers with their faces made of pure concept, began to applaud. The sound was like reality applauding itself, each clap creating ripples in the fabric of existence that spread outward into dimensions that mathematics hadn't yet discovered. Their appreciation wasn't for our performance, I realized, but for the very act of transformation itself, the moment when the possible becomes the impossible, and the impossible becomes truth. My new form moved with liquid grace through these ripples, each movement creating new forms of geometry. What had once been my skin had become a living canvas that painted itself with patterns that hurt to perceive, fractals that contained infinite copies of themselves, each one slightly different, slightly more removed from anything that could be called normal. Marcus danced beside me, his laughter now a physical force that sculpted space like clay. Remember when we thought this was a nightmare? His voice chimed like breaking universes. How limited our understanding was, how small our dreams. The clown, our creator, our destroyer, our eternal ringmaster, began to conduct our performance with gestures that left trails of possibility in the air. Each movement orchestrated not just our dance, but the very flow of reality around us. We were becoming living art, each pose and motion a statement about the true nature of existence. And as our dance reached its crescendo, as the music of spheres crashed around us in waves of impossible sound, I understood the final, beautiful truth: we weren't just performers in an eternal circus. We were the architects of a new kind of reality, one where the lines between performance and existence, between audience and performer, between sanity and madness, had been erased forever. The last echo of my human consciousness watched with fascination as my new form reached out to grasp another lost soul who had wandered into our domain, drawn by posters that appeared in the night and tickets that wrote themselves. I saw the fear in their eyes transform into understanding, then acceptance, then joy as they began their own metamorphosis. After all, every circus needs new performers. And the show, as they say, must go on. Forever. And ever. And ever.